Welcome to this lesson on engine construction. It's just basically getting you familiar with the layout of the actual engine. For the Airbus A320 family, the engine of choice is the CFM56. There are different variants, so of course pay attention to that when you're working on engines. But in general, I just want to give you a helicopter's view of the different modules or sections of an engine. You'll see that here in the diagram. In the front part of the engine, you have the fan cowl, the inlet air inlet part, which has a spinner cone, which is the front spinner cone. You also have a rear spinner cone that's attached to that. That's part of that front part. That's what is your part of that fan and booster section. The booster part is involving the low pressure compressor. That's what the boost is. After that first stage, it goes into, this is about air, the power of air and being able to produce thrust using the engine, obviously. After that first stage, it goes to a high pressure compressor stage. I say stage meaning a section because when we talk about the definition of stages, we're talking about the number of rotors and stators, the way they're designed. It depends on which model or variant as to how many stages. In this particular case, there's 9. That could be with again, it just depends. It could be 7 or 9 stages depending on whether it's a dash 5A or B or some other variant. So just kind of keep that in mind. The other part after that is the combustion section. This is after you have the fuel-air mixture, and now it's ready to have that mixture in the combustion chamber. After that, it goes to, you have a high-pressure turbine area, and then after that, the low-pressure turbine, and then finally, you have the exhaust system. That's where the turbine frame is located towards the rear of the engine, and the whole exhaust system, which if you haven't gone through that already, there's a whole section on the exhaust and the components that are involved with that. So it kind of gives you a layout, from front to back, or front to rear of the engine. One of the important things, of course, with the engine, as we're going to kind of talk about the components that are involved here, is the importance of markings that are on the blades. Obviously you have, when we talk about the fan and booster section, we're talking about fan blades. In this particular configuration, there are 36 fan blades, and they are marked, so there's a certain way that they have to go into their respective slots. Okay, I'm talking about the disc slots. There's a fan disc where you can actually install the blades into. Now, be aware that when you're installing, if they come in pairs, you need to keep that in mind and not mix, not separate those pairs where you have them one blade being mixed with something else. Because the reason that's important is because the pair that when they come together as a pair, the way that you're going to install them, those two are going to be diametrically opposed on on the disc. In other words, it's going to be 180 degrees from each other. And again, please pay attention to markings. You can't just arbitrarily pick fan blades and stick them, somewhere or force them in and do that, because that's wrong. These things are very, you have to be very deliberate with the installation of the specific blades. So again, pay attention to markings. Of course, follow the aircraft maintenance manual regarding the installation of all of that. And of course, besides fan blades, we also have bearings. There's different kinds of bearings that are just allow for the flow of the mechanics of the components. Okay, so, and they're numbered. When we talk about the bearings here related to the engine, we're talking about number 1, 2, number 1 and 2 bearings. We're talking about different kinds versus, for example, there's roller bearings and ball bearings. Bottom line is, anytime you have something moving, especially when you're talking about main engine bearings, what's the most important thing you need to be conscious about? Okay, I hope it starts with the letter L. Okay, it's lubrication, right? Lubrication is so important. All right, so keep that in mind. Lubrication when you have engine bearings. The distribution, of course, when we talk about engine oil, all that's going towards, the lubrication of these bearings. Okay. All right. Let's kind of go through a little bit of terminology with the fan section. That would be the front part of the engine. There's of course the fan, and in the middle of that, centrifugally, you have there's a cone actually on that you'll see. That's the front spinner cone that's attached to the rear spinner cone. And that fan section has, of course, the frame for the fan to surround it. And there's also a fan rotor, as well as the stator. And then, of course, you have a fan shaft that's there really for torque, creating the torque, being able to transfer energy from the rotors to stators, okay, or from turbine to fan rotor, excuse me. Okay, that kind of gives you an idea with a fan section, fan frame, fan rotor, and stator, and then of course you have a fan shaft. Now, I mentioned about the spinner cones. You have a front cone and a rear, and it's pretty much the same for dash 5B versus the dash 5A when you compare. The difference here is just the number of stages of the low pressure compressor. You don't have to memorize this, but just letting you know that there's two different number of stages for each of those for dash 5B and dash 5B or 5A. On your 5B, it's a 4-stage. Your 5A has a 3-stage axial booster. Okay. Your spinner front cone. The reason it's designed the way it is, think about every part coming from manufacturer. It's designed to minimize any threat to the function of that system, whatever it might be. In this particular case, we're talking about the engine system, and in this particular case, the threat is ice buildup. And when you have that air coming in, it can be very cold air, right? Coming into that air inlet, that cone is specifically designed to at least reduce any ice buildup at that point. Okay. Now, remember I said that you have the front spinner cone, and it is attached to the rear spinner cone by a rear flange, and that connection is important. There are 6 places where it's connected and screws in. So just be aware of those details, of course. And again, follow the instructions from the maintenance manual as far as installation, because what seems like it could be put together, and you don't want to be careless with all of that, of course. Pay attention to any indent marks there for proper fitting of the screws, etc. Okay. And of course, anytime you're working on any of this, you want to make sure you put your safety tags on where necessary. Okay. All right. So that's your spinner front cone, and how it can disconnect to the rear spinner cone. All right. Okay. And let's kind of go a little bit. I'm just going to describe a little bit on the fan blades. Remember, I said there's 36. On some other ones, there's 24. But I don't want to confuse you by bringing in that number. That was not my intent. But when we're talking here about the A320 family, there are 36 blades. Now, be aware that, of course, with blades, and they're pretty strong. When we talk about metals, if you've ever studied metals, there's different tensile strengths of metal, depending obviously on what kind it is. Determines how strong it is. And with the construction of the fan blades, these are made of a titanium alloy, so it's pretty strong. The idea, of course, with titanium, it has a very high tolerance for temperatures, for very high temperatures. So of course, it makes sense if you're going to be constructing an engine where you're going to have a lot of heat. So here you've got the titanium material. Okay. Now, the way the blades are, again, like I mentioned before, they can come in pairs, and be aware of how that has to be installed because of that. There are spacers that are actually underneath each blade, those need to be there because those are kind of limiting the movement of those blades to a certain degree. Okay. And the little difference here you might find with the Dash 5B is a retainer lug that is going to be at the rear end of the blade root. Okay, and with the idea there, it's engaging that forward flange of the booster spool. Again, the idea here is it's limiting. When you see the spacer or you're talking about the retainer lug, those are creating a limitation of movement to some small degree. Okay, the other thing too that you'll find is dampers, right? Because we have a problem with vibration when things are moving, and here if we can keep the vibration to a minimum, then we have less wear and tear of components involved with the operations. Okay, all right, I do want to mention the SHIM. There's a SHIM that's between the fan blade and the fan disc assembly. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to go ahead and introduce some test questions, possibly test questions, just to kind of throw this at you right now, and then we'll go back to our lesson. Okay, how many stages does the compressor module have? Okay, I know I said, well, it depends, right? But I did mention a particular number. Okay, so your two choices are, is it 7 or 9? Okay, it's 9. That's the answer. The fan and booster module consists of the front and rear spinner cones. Is that true or false? That's true. I was mentioning that. All right, what is the main support structure for the engine? Incidentally, it is actually the fan frame. It is not the turbine frame, it is the fan frame. That's the main support structure for the entire engine. All right, so that gives you a little bit of idea what kind of questions to expect. Okay, and I'll come back to some other questions here in a little bit. All right, so now you've got an orientation on the fan blades. How many are there? 36. What kind of material are they made of? Titanium, a titanium alloy. Why that particular metal? Because it has a very high tolerance for temperatures that are really, really high. So, which you have, of course, with the engine area. Okay, and of course, be careful when you're installing and removing. You want to have them, they're marked. You can't just say, oh, this is a fan blade, they all look alike, let's just stick them here. You can't do that anyway, the way they're architecturally designed, and they're marked. So, just be aware. Still, it's amazing how things can still happen. Defying certain designs. Humans are humans, and things sometimes can be put the wrong way despite all the efforts to avoid that human error. Okay, all right, so it gives you an idea with the fan blades themselves, and then at the root of the fan blade you're going to see the markings on here of information. It's going to show the part number, the serial number, the momentum weight, and the manufacturer code. And that's important. Like I said, you don't want to just take a fan blade and it doesn't matter which blade. Okay, those, just to let you know, those markings are there at the blade root. Of course, your fan disc has those recesses. Remember I said that I call them disc slots, but those are where you would actually put the blades in if you were in charge of installing those blades. Okay. All right. Okay, and then you also have the fan frame outer case, because there's an inner and an outer case. Your fan frame outer case, this is on the Dash 5B. Here, what you have on the Dash 5B is you have a transfer gearbox mounting pad. That's at the 6 o'clock position. You don't have to memorize that because you just follow the manual, but I'm just giving you a brush stroke on all this. You have an identity plate that's between 2 and 3 o'clock. Okay, that's the tech insertion program identity plate that you'll find there. And then of course the engine data plate is at the 3 o'clock position, because isn't it at the fan, on the fan frame outer or surface of that outer case of the fan frame. Okay, all right, and then you have the same thing with the Dash 5A as far as what to expect to see. Transfer gearbox is also at the mounting pad is also at the 6 o'clock position. You know, it's pretty similar. There may be a few differences there, but for the most part, it's the same. All right. Now you have ports for bore scoping, because you know there's some areas where it's not visible to the eye just from an ordinary position of maintaining or working on them. So you have, and this is for the high pressure compressor section, this is where you have the bore scope ports. There are 9 of them. Those are approximately at the 5 o'clock position, and they're numbered. Just again, follow, you know, the manual. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to confuse you. But not 9. There's just 9. Just know there's 9 bore scope ports, and those are on the lower stator case. Okay. The importance, of course, of bore scoping. You want to make sure that, you know, there's nothing. I mean, we're looking for any kind of unusual markings that may be a threat to the integrity of the structure. So you know, it's good if you're assigned to do that, but of course, like anything, it always helps to have partners when you work on. If you're tasked to change the tires on the aircraft, or you know, work on something else on structure, taking panels off, it's always good to have a buddy. You know, have somebody. If you're paired together, that's really the best option on all of that. And the same thing when we talk about doing the bore scoping. Okay. You also have the high pressure turbine nozzle assembly. You can do inspection there as well, and you have ports in that area. Here you've got ports at the 1, 3, 6, and 10 o'clock positions, and those are located immediately in front of the fuel manifold. Okay, so I'll talk about the high pressure turbine nozzle bore scope ports. Those are at the 1, 3, 6, and 10 o'clock, and those are immediately in front of the fuel manifold. You may want to underline that. That's actually a question that you probably are going to see on a test. All right. Okay, so it gives you an idea, or it gives you an awareness anyway, on the bore scope ports. You also have on the low pressure turbine case, you have ports, again, all those where those fuel nozzles are located. Okay. All right, and what about the accessory gearbox? Let's just go over that quickly. Your accessory gearbox assembly, that's mounted under the fan case, and that's at the 6 o'clock position. Of course, when you have accessory gearbox, that gearbox train is, you know, obviously meant there to transfer energy to the accessory components related to the engine, right? That's what that's there for. You've got a gear train, you get the housing, and you've got a drive shaft to create that energy and have that transfer. The drive shaft assembly, it's, you know, being able to transfer power between your transfer gearbox and the AGB, okay, and your accessory gearbox. Okay, you get, of course, some tube housing there, and of course the drive shaft. Okay. All right. So what do you have with the AGB? Okay, accessory gearbox, as far as mounting pads that are existing there, what are those mounting pads there for? You have mounting pads for things like the hydraulic pump, for also the IDG, for the alternator, so you have power supply, excuse me, power supply, by the way, for FADIC, because remember I mentioned, if you've been in that lesson already, there was an alternate, kind of a little backup power supply for the FADIC, and this is actually where this would be located, at the accessory gearbox. There's a mounting pad for that, and of course you have the lubrication unit. Can't go without having the lubrication unit mounting pad, so you have that. Okay. Again, it gives you an idea on the gearbox assembly. Okay. All right, let's get some questions under our belt right now. So let me go ahead and throw out a couple more, several actually to you, just so you have an awareness of what kind of questions. In order to replace the combustor, and I didn't mention this earlier, but the combustion section, which, you have the fuel nozzles going connected to the combustion area, is that let's say you wanted to replace the combustor. Do you have to remove the fuel nozzles? Okay, the answer is no, you do not. Okay, you do not have to remove the fuel nozzles to replace the combustor. Yeah, which component supports the primary exhaust system? Okay, is it the turbine or the fan frame? Okay, well, what's at the rear of the engine? The turbine frame, right? Because somebody said it's the fan frame's in the front, turbine's in the back. Oh, what's in the back? The exhaust system. Okay, to which engine module do the stator and rotor belong? I know I didn't mention that earlier, but I'm mentioning it now. Okay, here it's going to be your fan and boost assembly, or excuse me, your module. All right, how many fan blades are there on the engine that's installed in the Airbus A320 family? Is it 36 or 27? Okay, I mentioned it's 36. There's 36 fan blades. All right, okay, let's see what else can we find. All right, what can you find at the end of a blade root? Okay, at the end of it. I didn't say underneath it. At the end of a blade root. Okay, at the end of it, you're going to find a retainer lug. Okay, what is installed in the space below the inner platform and adjacent blades in order to dampen, hint, hint, dampen vibration? Is it silencers or dampers? Yeah, it's dampers. Remember I mentioned dampers besides hint, hint. I just said it dampens vibration. All right, so where's the accessory gearbox? Where is that located? Okay, is it under the fan case at the 6 o'clock position, or is it under the fan blades at the 12 o'clock position? All right, I said that it's under the fan case at the 6 o'clock position. All right, if you install fan blades, what is one caution to be aware of? Okay, is it that you have to make sure that each blade has a shim installed on the blade root, or you want to make sure that each blade has a nice polish to it? Okay, pretty easy. I can't imagine you missing this one. It's the first one, okay, right? I mentioned shim before. We're going to make sure that each blade has a shim installed on the blade root. What should you do before installing blades in their disc slots? Is it number 1, wash the shims first, or 2, lubricate the slots first? All right, it's lubrication, right? You want to make sure you lubricate those slots and all those recesses before you start putting components in them. All right, and then remember I said about the pairs? You want to keep fan blade pairs apart 180 degrees. Okay, that's a true or false statement. Of course, that's true. And lastly, what is immediately located in front of the fuel manifold? Is it the fuel nozzles or the borescope ports? Okay, I mentioned that it's the borescope ports. That's what it is. Okay, so I gave you an idea about the general layout of the engine from front to back. You have your spinner cone with the rear cone at the front in the center. And then of course you have your whole inlet cowl or fan frame that's there where you have air coming as intake. All right, that concludes our lesson, and thank you for your participation, and we look forward to having you in the other videos.